Welcome to CIHT Podcasts.
So welcome to the CIHT podcast. I'm your host, Justin Ward. Last week, Grant Shapps announced a once-in-a-generation push to change travel behaviour in Britain. The Secretary of State to announce that and a $2 billion fund for walking and cycling is quite a significant shift, and it was partly response to COVID-19 and measures to ensure social distancing. But it also signalled intent, I think, for government to actually make a major change in transport. So today I'm delighted to be joined by an expert on walking and cycling, Phil Jones, who joins us today for this podcast. So Phil, what aspects stood out for you in terms of the announcement last week?
Yeah, well, I think it was a really interesting announcement. It was alongside the direction for the pop-up work as well to re-grasp the opportunity. But I think what stood out for me were some of the detail. I mean, the 5 billion had been announced some time before, but the balance between buses and cycles hadn't been made clear. And we now see that 2 billion is for cycling, which is a significant amount of money. I mean, we've previously seen figures of, I think it was 150 million or thereabouts for the cycle ambition cities, but this is an order of magnitude greater than that, which is fantastic to see. And for me, I think what was really important was the talk of it being a long-term settlement to put cycling and walking on a similar basis to other aspects of transport policy. I think active travel has always been a little bit of a sort of almost a fair weather friend. It's given credence sometimes, but then it falls away. We've seen Cycling England created and then abolished, and it comes and goes. But this seems to be now, if it's delivered upon, the first time that it's put on a really sound footing and actually giving a proper basis to the cycling and walking investment strategy, or the second version of the CWIS, because the first one was really a little bit of a kind of scraping together of what investment had already been collected. This, for the first time, I think is living up to its billing and saying, this is actually what we will invest over a reasonable period of time.
And it's interesting you mentioned the first cycling and walking investment strategy that I think earmarked 1.2 billion for walking and cycling, but that was money that may be spent. What actually did come out of that?
It's quite difficult to assess, really, because quite a large part of that 1.2 billion, as I recall, was funding that was given to LEPs and local authorities for local transport that, of course, could be spent on cycling. But in most cases, it wasn't. There were relatively small amounts of money, like the Cycle Ambition City grants, that were ring-fenced for cycling and probably even less for walking. So I think the first CWIS was, as I say, a kind of pulling together to try to get a big headline figure. I'm being quite cynical now, I guess, to demonstrate the government was doing the right thing. But a lot of that was in the gift of local authorities who, don't always make those choices and choose to spend the money on other things.
And in terms of investments for cycling, what would be the most effective to increase cycling levels?
It's really interesting. I think different people have different ideas. I think we certainly do need to provide safe or I say safe streets. Streets that are felt to be safe is more important. I think we actually see very few accidents, thankfully, or collisions and casualties. They're actually still quite rare. So, but if someone goes out on a bike and it's a busy road, they probably won't actually get hurt, but they will almost certainly experience a slightly scary occurrence, a close pass, or something that doesn't make them feel very comfortable. So the really, really important thing is to create spaces where people feel safe to cycle. That, I think, is an absolute prerequisite. That's not enough, though. I think if you then do want to get a real shift, and this is where things get a little more difficult politically, it is necessary to make it a little more difficult to get around by car. I think that's what we've found. So places like Waltham Forest, the low traffic neighbourhoods in London that have seen some really worthwhile increases in cycling have just made it a little less convenient to make those short trips by car. And it gets to the point where why would you, if it takes you about as long or even longer to do that mile journey by car as to walk or get on your bike, people will make those choices. People are rational beings. They will do what is the most convenient thing to do, and you can make cycling and walking more convenient, or you can make driving a little less convenient. And it's probably a combination of both, I think.
I think that answer gave away a bit of the indication for my next question, was about can you actually buy yourself to increase active travel? And obviously you alluded to sort of the feeling of being safe when you're cycling, so a lot of it's about culture and behaviour. But I guess there's other cultural and behavioural barriers to cycling that need to be addressed as well, beyond the safe aspect.
Yeah, I'm sure that's right. But culture does change. I mean, it's interesting. I think, I've been riding around central London now for about 15 years, I suppose, when I began. And it was a pretty rare thing then. So we've seen the growth of cycling culture, I think, in London over the last 10 to 15 years. So it will come. Culture is not a static thing, and it changes in response to an environment. I think you can maybe hasten it along. We can do encouragement and promotion and really push the concept of cycling. And if politicians are seen to cycle, and decision makers, and it's presented as a normal thing to do in the press, then I think that does have that helps too. But a lot of it will just happen, naturally, I think, as people gradually find that it is a fun and convenient and pleasant way to get around a city. Yeah. I was going to say that it was quite interesting for me how the culture changed. I remember, going back to around sort of 2005-06, and the Evening Standard used to write about cycling and cyclists as a kind of other. There was a definite feeling of it being an out group, and that's still true in many cities and in many aspects of the press. But there was unfortunately a journalist was killed on the Times, and that, I think, fed the actual London Times, and that fed through into the journalism community. And I think there seemed to be a shift at some point when newspapers began to write about cyclists as us, and actually taking up their campaign for better conditions rather than being seen as the other. So it's quite interesting how culture does shift in response to sort of changing circumstances.
You'll pardon my terrible punning with the English language, but is there a risk that the dash for cash leads to the risk of a crash in terms of possibly schemes that aren't thought through? What needs to happen so that the 2 billion is spent wisely?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's very, very true. Yeah, well, we worked with WSP on an update to the Department for Transport's technical guidance on cycle infrastructure. So the current document is Local Transport Note 208. So it came out in 2008. And I think it's fair to say even by 2008, it was already looking a little bit old-fashioned. It said things like, it's rare to be able to find space within a highway to provide cycle facilities. So it was almost a kind of admission of defeat before you'd even started. And after that, within 5 years, we got the new London cycling design standards that were a real step forward, and the Wales Active Travel Design Guide. So what's happened now is that Department of Transport was caught up, and they've commissioned and had produced a new document, but it's not been published yet. It's been sadly caught up in the coronavirus problem of information coming out slowly from government. So Department of Transport really need to dust that off now and publish it, and they do talk about in the article for the 2 billion fund. It talks about higher standards for permanent infrastructure across England. So I'm pretty sure that's what the department is referring to, and I think that does now need to come out pretty quickly, so that authorities know what to do. And from conversations I have, engineers out there are really, really keen to see it. They want to know what is good practice, and they want to do the right thing.
As part of the updated cycling and walking investment strategy due to be released in early June, the creation of a national cycling and walking inspectorate will be made. What would this mean, and why is it potentially important?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and I think that word inspectorate hadn't been picked up by a few people. Obviously, people focus on the money, but if it means what it says, I read the word inspectorate as meaning it will be a body that puts local authorities under scrutiny, which I think is a step on from a body that is there to guide authorities. We've had Cycling England. There were bodies before that would kind of work with willing local authorities. This now suggests the tone of this announcement suggests that this is not going to be a choice for local authorities, that they will be strongly encouraged to do this and perhaps even held to account by this inspectorate if they don't deliver. And I think maybe the COVID-19 crisis has just reinforced how important this is now. It's no longer a kind of nice to have. It's essential. If public transport is difficult to use for some time, and government guidance is to use that only if you have to, and the consequences, we do see very high levels of car traffic, then that's quite a disastrous outcome for all kinds of reasons, emissions and congestion and delays and so on. So, for the sake of the economy, for the sake of the literally the health of the nation, we do need to see this shift now, and it suggests. To me, I'm overemphasizing, but just suggests to me that maybe the government is just strengthening its hand a little bit and is going to actually require local authorities to do this in some way. Maybe a kind of step on from the localism agenda that we've seen for so many years.
Well, thank you for your time, Phil. That was excellent. That was an interview with Phil Jones, a CHT member and a leading expert on cycling infrastructure in the UK and overseas.